The show starts in 3, 2, 1, go.
Good morning, CaneSport. It's the 4th of March, 2025. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, joined this morning by our managing editor, Matt Shodell, and Stephen Wagner, as we discuss the news of the day after the Miami Hurricanes began spring practice 2025, combination of the indoor practice facility, I should say the Carol Sofer indoor practice facility. Good morning, Carol. I know you're watching. And also the Green Tree practice field. So I guess we should start there. I mean, man, what a long, action-packed day out there yesterday between about 13 elite recruits visiting practice, and then, of course, the practice themselves and getting our first glimpse at this new team. I saw Carson Beck. Was a little surprised to see him in a number 11 uniform. Just basically standing there chilling, and he did a little bit of footwork drills early in practice, but for the most part, he was standing there observing, taking mental reps. He clearly has already started working with the coaches, learning the playbook, and now he gets to stand there, and even though he can't throw the ball yet, he can watch the progressions of the quarterback and see these offensive plays take life in front of him, and that's what he was doing throughout the practice. And Matt, I'll start with you. The one thing I did notice as I watched Carson Beck, and I admittedly, even though he wasn't doing anything, I admit I watched Carson Beck a lot. I mean, he's obviously the most intriguing new member of this team. He was really eyeballing the receivers. He wasn't even watching the quarterbacks really throwing the ball. He was watching the routes that the receivers were running and kind of studying the nuances of the guys that he's going to be throwing to in the summer and fall when he does get back to live action. I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, I guess for a guy that really is not in a competition per se, most likely, we won't say definitely not, but we'll say most likely not in a competition to be the starting quarterback for the Hurricanes this year. I guess it really doesn't matter what Emory Williams and Judd Anderson and Luke Nickel are doing. He's not going to be throwing to them. He's watching the receivers. Matt, just in general, your observations out there pertaining to the offensive passing game, we'll start with that. What we were seeing from the quarterbacks, what we were seeing from the receivers. I thought Emory Williams' arm strength has improved. He seemed to have a little more zip on the ball than when we last saw him in the fall. I will say that. Nickel and Anderson kind of, had some moments, but it was the first day of spring and everybody's timing clearly is not there yet. But Matt, go ahead. Your thoughts on what you saw out there from the quarterbacks and the receivers.
I was watching Carson Beck a lot too, and it was good to see him just, he actually did some drills. Nothing, he wasn't taking snaps, but he was holding a football, doing footwork, going through reps with the other quarterbacks. And it was nice to hear like Mark Fletcher saying how a bunch of players went to his house for the Super Bowl. And, it sounds like Beck's taking some steps towards bonding with the team. I don't know if people call it leadership or bonding, whatever. At least he's making an effort, right? He's not like out there on his own like some perceptions were, just doing his thing with his girlfriend in their $6 million house or whatever, and his partying in his 2 fancy cars. I mean, he's involving his teammates. And I did not see him intently watching the receivers. I saw him in the quarterbacks group with the other quarterbacks, sort of watching the other quarterbacks. So it's interesting you say that. We didn't talk about that. But if he's doing that, great. At some point he has to get the timing down with his receivers when he's actually throwing passes himself.
I didn't see him take his eyes off the receivers.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I'm not surprised that you don't agree with me or you didn't see.
I did not agree with that. You did not agree with you.
No, you live in your own universe. It doesn't matter whether
I was watching the whole. I'm like you. I'm not fixated on one guy. I'm trying to watch the whole team. But with that part aside, the quarterbacks were hit or miss. They just, Emory threw some great passes and threw some not great passes. One ball just totally flipped out of his hands. Luke Nickel threw an interception badly behind the receiver on like a 10-yard route. He had a couple other passes off the mark, but then he also threw some great balls. Judd Anderson, same thing. They were just inconsistent, but it was day one. Like, it's to be expected. They're not Cam Ward out there, right? They're guys who are still working in progress to get better. That's fine. what was different in this practice versus a lot of the others we've seen for the first spring practice is, we don't watch the whole practice, okay? But we watched, 45 minutes to an hour of it, and we always see the one-on-ones, some receiver routes against DBs and things like that, where the quarterbacks are throwing live, so to speak, in those situations. And generally, when you have a one-on-one receiver against a DB, the receiver almost always wins that battle, or 90% of the time wins that battle, whatever the percentage is, a high percentage, because the receiver knows where he's going, the quarterback knows where the receiver is going, and the defensive back does not know. And those situations, I mean, for anyone who knows football, huge advantage to the wide receiver, one-on-one with nobody else on the field and the quarterback throwing the ball. And this was probably one of the tightest coverages I've seen in a spring practice or fall practice that's been open to the media in a long, maybe ever. I mean, they were draped all over these receivers for the most part. I'd say as the practice went along, it got a little bit more in the receiver's favor, but especially early on, I was surprised. And you could say, oh, well, the receivers aren't fast enough or quick enough or good enough, but maybe it's just the DBs are much better, right? Or maybe it's a combination of both. It's so hard to tell. That's why people ask me how Miami looks right after the first practice. First of all, it's in shorts. And you could ask me after the 15th spring practice, they're playing against themselves. So it's always a case of, when the offense looks great in general, is it because the offense is that amazing, or is it because the defense is going to be bad? And when the defense is dominating, the offense can't even run a play. Is it because the defense is going to be one of the best defenses in the country, or is it because the offense is going to be one of the worst offenses in the country? And that's why it's so difficult until you get into the second real game of the season. You don't really know. Like, that's the problem that I've always had expressing to people how good or bad a team might be, which is why I tend to err on the side of, well, the last 20 years hasn't been so great.
All right. So, I mean, Carson Beck, obviously, whether he was looking at the receivers or not, when I was watching him, he was looking at the receivers, and the bottom line is the receivers were giving him something good to look at. Let's go there with this. Stephen, I'm going to start with Malachi Toney, because he's a true freshman who has no business sticking out on the first practice of spring. And every time I watched that kid yesterday, he was sticking out, including after practice when he went from the shower to the jugs machine, and he was sitting there working on his hands after practice. And to see a true freshman after practice number 1 doing that, I thought was extremely impressive. Stephen, you covered him a lot in high school. I know we've had the conversation. We expected this kid to be really, really good. But it's absolutely amazing that he reclassified. He really should be a junior in high school right now. He comes to the U, goes into spring practice a year early, and unquestionably was standing out in his first practice, caught a couple deep balls that we saw. And just in general, you could tell there's just really was confident and knew what he was doing. This kid is, to say he's beyond his years, Stephen, would be an absolute understatement.
Yeah, I think is the thing that kind of makes him different from a lot of other receivers, is how mature he is. I mean, he really is exceptionally mature. And, sometimes he could be a little bit awkward with the media and stuff like that. But whenever he's actually on the football field, he's one of these guys who just kind of gets it. He understands different concepts. He understands how spacing should work. He understands how to find soft spots and zones. He understands how to exploit defenders in different ways that they're covering him. We even saw him go, I think, like 19 for 22 or something like that, passing as a quarterback, and win a state championship with American Heritage, going up against Orlando Jones and Miami's 2026 quarterback commit. He really is a unique football player. And, coming out of high school, it almost kind of felt weird to sort of pigeonhole him to just being a receiver, especially because he led his team to a state championship, playing a very difficult playoff schedule as their quarterback whenever their starting quarterback got hurt. I think that the game has already slowed down for him a little bit. And now he's just getting to a point where he's showing off his skill set on maybe a little bit of a larger stage. Usually whenever a kid reclassifies, more generally, I'm kind of just personally against kids reclassifying. If all things are equal, and at the end of the day, it really does just become about, a 16-year-old deciding that he's ready for college right now, as opposed to, being 17 or 18 years old and going ahead and enrolling in college. That's one thing, but, obviously, elephant in the room. This is 2025. There are a lot of external factors, wink, wink, about that would cause a kid to go ahead and reclassify. But Malachi looks like a guy who maybe shouldn't have even been a member of the 2025 class, but looks like he was a member of the 2024 class. He really is one of these kids that just kind of gets to places and picks things up so quickly. He picks up playbooks quickly. He picks up responsibilities quickly. He is just a flat out ball player. And I remember talking to people last year and asking, hey, why does Miami want a kid who is reclassifying from 2026 to 2025? Why are they so gung-ho on finding a way to get him into this cycle? And they told me, they said it's because they seriously think he's a kid who can go in there and start right away. And, I kind of rolled my eyes about that because you hear about, every single high school coach in America thinks that wherever their player ends up committing, he's going to have a chance to walk in and start right away. That's actually the case with Malachi Toney. He really is that kind of really special player. I honest to God, really do feel like he could be one of those guys who is making an impact this year. At first I kind of, I was kind of hesitant on it, but the more that I heard going through workouts in January and February, the more I kind of heard, wait, this kid might actually be that good.
Yeah. So, you don't want to get too crazy practice one with a kid like this who's, coming, should be in his junior year of high school. But it was pretty obvious out there that Malachi Toney is going to play this year and is going to be a key part of this offense. I really feel that way. And I've been fooled before. The haters are going to say, Gary, you said Ray Joseph last year was going to be a big part of the offense too. Guilty. I did. But this one just feels a little bit different. And, I do feel very confident that Malachi Toney has the maturity to contribute to this team this year. And that's a good thing for the Canes. Matt, some other observations. And by the way, guys, we have coverage of all this stuff every day on CaneSport.com, live from the practice field. We have video and reports and you name it, we've got it. And if you're not yet a subscriber to CaneSport, please come join our site. Become a member of our community. Your subscriptions literally allow our entire team to do what we do every single day to make you guys the most informed fans in America. And but we really do need to try to bring everybody together and have you guys as subscribers on our site. So head on over to CaneSport.com. You could try us out for $1. And then obviously, you stay on from there. We think you'll have a great time. We have a really good community of fans that spend their days on the message boards talking Canes. And obviously, we bring you guys hundreds of articles every month on the team. So it's really a good place to be if you're a Canes fan, CaneSport.com. But Matt, some other stuff that we touched on yesterday, in terms of receivers and quarterbacks was another freshman by the name of Dalen Upshaw. Stood out a little bit. I mean, there was one play we saw where he beat out Charles Brantley, who's a veteran cornerback, and he had another really nice over-the-shoulder grab in the end zone of a different pass, catching it off on his fingertips. And again, just didn't look like a freshman. And this is good that you see some good young talent coming in the program. And I just mentioned him a minute ago. Another guy that kind of stood out a little bit yesterday was Ray Joseph. Looked like he might have shed a few pounds, looked a little quicker running his routes, and was making some big catches. So maybe a year later, after I said it last year, a year later, maybe Ray also finds a spot in this offense, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough day for Brantley and Markeith Williams in particular from the parts that we saw. Ray, I thought, looks like he's lost a little bit of weight, looks quicker. He actually I thought he looked really good. Malachi Toney, I think, is a guy he's going to play. I mean, you watch that guy. I mean, he was like clowning DBs, doing stutter steps on his routes and stuff, but it doesn't even matter what he does. Like, he's just, once he turns on the Jets, he's just gone. I mean, he's got that
it factor. It's an it factor.
He's got a swag about him, and he dropped 2 passes early on. People probably was just excited or whatever. But I mean, he's got that swag to him. He's an explosive playmaker. The only question with him, like, you see the drop passes, right? That's what happens with freshmen. That's why coaches sometimes don't trust freshmen. You don't know for sure. They get a little too excited in a big game or a big moment, and you don't know what happens sometimes. But yeah, Dalen Upshaw, I thought, had a couple of really nice plays. Nycar quietly had a good practice. Everyone wants to watch the freshman and watch JoJo. And by the way, Elijah Lofton was outstanding. Yeah, he looks like he's faster and bigger. Like, that's what you want. You want guys to get bigger and faster, not bigger and slower. Elijah Lofton got bigger and faster, and it's crazy because I watched Elijah Lofton run a route, and he's just so smooth and so fast, and just so just his hands. You don't even hear the ball hit his hands. Greg Olson with his hands. And then I watched Jackson Carver, the poor guy, and he's like slow and can't create separation. Like, you don't recognize sometimes how good some of these other guys are until you see a guy who's still trying to work his way up and become that. I mean, that's just like, he's a next level guy, Elijah Lofton, when you watch him in practice. And again, like we talked about on the show that made everyone crazy yesterday morning, you have to wait and see with some of these guys, because everyone we're talking about right now has not done anything other than have 150 yards in a season or play 150 reps in a season. Like, they've done nothing in actual games, right? So that's what you have to wait for. But watching the offensive guys in practice, one-on-one, like I said, early in the practice, they weren't getting separation. Later in the practice, they were. A couple of DBs struggled. But then some of these receivers had really good moments, and Elijah Lofton in particular looked great at tight end. I didn't see any other tight ends, so I thought we're going to be really good downfield receiving tight ends, at least just in the first practice. But again, it's the first practice. Another guy who I really like how they're using him is on the other side of the ball. I think Bobby Pruitt's in line for a big year, because it's going to be very interesting to see what Heatherman does with his defense. Pruitt was lining up at a regular linebacker position, outside linebacker, but he also was lining up as a star or nickel guy. And when you look at Bobby Pruitt, he looks more like a big safety than he does a linebacker. So I think he can really be, and with his speed and the way he hits and just, all this other stuff that we know that he can do, I think Heatherman's going to find a real role for him. I think he might be the silent assassin type, the guy that nobody talks about, may not be mentioning him again all spring. But I'm telling you guys right now out there, that's a guy to do not forget that Matt Shodell said Bobby Pruitt will have a role and potentially be a decent playmaker, if not this season, in the future. I mean, that guy, I think is.
No, it has to be this season, because if it's not this season, you're as bad as me with my Ray Joseph.
I do think it'll be this season. I take it back. I do think it'll be this season. I just don't see a way in which a guy like that's not on the field quite a bit. And they need to find answers. They're putting corners at safeties. I was surprised actually at how small Brantley was. They want to use him at nickel, but he's got. I don't know about his physicality. I mean, his legs are like this. He's got the skinny legs. I don't want to say frog legs, but I just said it, so it's too late now. Can't take it back. He's got for a couple of hours. He's got very skinny legs, so I don't know how you use him at nickel, but he's also not big enough to play against big receivers on the boundary. So he was really good at Michigan State. I was very surprised. I don't know if he's coming off injury. Maybe he just has lost weight or something, but he didn't look as physically, impressive as I thought he would coming from Michigan State. So I was surprised about that. And guess what? He struggled. He did struggle in coverage. So I was disappointed with that. but they got other guys now, right? O'Connor, Xavier Lucas. Like they got guys who have done it, who are talented. I know Xavier was a backup, but like he's talented. O'Connor started. So they're going to be fine at cornerback. I really believe that. The question is what happens at safety. And we could say that Marquise, we could say that, sorry, not Marquise, we could say that that Zaquan Patterson isn't practicing because Mario said it. Like, we're not allowed to say injuries and we're not allowed to say depth charts, but Mario actually said that Zaquan Patterson's banged up. So now we can say that he's banged up. So he didn't practice. So, I mean, but he'll be really good at one of the safety spots. And the question is, what do they do at the other one? And it wouldn't shock me if, Xavier Lucas, or they find somebody else that maybe isn't at safety right now, that's at corner or at nickel, maybe even a Jadeus Richard, who will wind up at safety. They need more safety numbers for sure.
Yeah. And day one of spring practice, you don't want to be too judgmental. I mean, we're not going to sit here and talk about the greatness that might happen on defense. They're not in pads yet. You're not seeing physicality. It's very early in the game, but you could, some of these skill guys you could start making some judgments on, and that's what we've tried to do. And like I said, you got a ton of that opinion and coverage that's on the website right now. So get on over to CaneSport.com, and if you're not yet a member, again, please subscribe. All right, one of the things I got the biggest kick of on day one was all the chatter about numbers. You had freshmen walking around the practice facility bitching that they didn't get their numbers and how upset they were. Then you look at the number changes. There's 5 guys from last year who changed their number. Zaquan Patterson went from 20 to 0. Damari Brown went from 6 to 2. Justin Scott went from 98 to 5. Malik Bryant went from 24 to 9. And Popo Aguirre went from 32 to 10. Why a linebacker thought he needs number 10, I don't know. But all those guys changed their numbers. And we also list all the freshmen and what their numbers are on the website for you, as well as the transfers. And Carson Beck, who I believe wore number 15 at Georgia, is wearing number 11 at Miami. So that's that
Ken
was
Dorsey's number. Ken Dorsey, shades of Ken Dorsey.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Has another quarterback worn 11 since Dorsey? I don't know.
I don't know. Somebody said no, but I find that hard to believe. I mean, maybe not a starting quarterback, but
a lot of numbers. You don't only have 4 or 5 quarterbacks a year.
Brown.
Yeah, other quarterbacks have definitely had 11. Yeah.
Jakari Brown wore number 11. He was just here.
So those obviously proclamations are not accurate, but anyway, it was interesting that he was 15 at Georgia and is 11 here. Not that it matters. What difference does it make? It really doesn't make much at all. All right. So I mentioned that there were a lot of recruits out there on Monday yesterday, and one of them actually ended up committing last night. That's offensive lineman Ben Congdon from Ohio. Committed to the Canes, and it was funny. He had a little brother that was on the trip with him. That, like, I mean, this kid's a little brother. So, Steven, we were like, this kid's the little brother. He looks like he's a junior in college already. Just in pure size and everything. But it was funny. There was one point where I went to my car to get something, and I realized that I had parked directly across from where the Congdon family parked as well, and his mom and little brother were sitting in the car, and I noticed on the front of the car there was an Ohio State license plate, and I'm thinking to myself, oh man, what? Like, obviously the kid's going to Ohio State now. Of course, hasn't been offered by Ohio State yet. Miami has offered him, but I'm like, how are they going to get with this? Who comes to Miami with an Ohio State tag in front of their car? And I didn't think things were looking so great. But then as the day went on and we saw how well the visit was going and we saw the look on Ben Congdon's face, we started to get an idea that this is a kid that's thinking of committing to Miami. And then, of course, he did follow through in the evening and commit. Steven, you covered him yesterday. You've talked to him many times. Got to speak a little bit about his visit to Miami. What sold the Canes on Ben Congdon? I mean, what sold Ben Congdon on the Canes?
Well, first off, what sold the Canes on Ben Congdon?
I mean, fair enough.
I mean, it really does come down to his size, his flexibility, and his bend, coupled with this really awesome pad level, tremendous explosiveness, and I mean, to put it simply, an ability to displace large human beings. I mean, he looks like your offensive tackle if you could build an offensive tackle in a lab. He's about 6'7.5". I think right now he's somewhere around 280 pounds. I know he's gotten up to about the 300-pound range before, but he wrestles, and so right now his weight's down a little bit for wrestling. He's an elite wrestler, by the way, in the state of Ohio, which is pretty well renowned for having really, really top-notch wrestling, the way South Florida is known for having really top-notch high school football. But wrestling has a lot of traits that carry over to offensive line play. All sorts of stuff with hands, hip level, being able to maintain a low center of gravity, flexibility. I think all of those things transfer over to his game really, really well. You can see on his tape, he's very flexible. He's got really quick instincts. He's very explosive. He's 6'8", but he finds a way to play with a low center of gravity, especially in the run game. I think that there's probably still some work that he could benefit from, there's some work that needs to be done. He could benefit from getting a little bit of help in the passing game, which is very, very common for, I'd say, the overwhelming majority of high school offensive linemen whenever they commit, outside of maybe a Jackson Cantwell or Francis Mauigoa or someone like that. But I really, really like him a lot. I think this is an absolutely fantastic foundational piece for Miami in this class. I think he can play either tackle. He can play left tackle or right tackle. I think it probably would just depend on how the rest of the roster ends up shaping out by the time that it actually is his turn. But as for what sold Ben Congdon on Miami, I mean, man, I really do at the end of the day think it was just Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabal. The resume that they have developing and evaluating offensive linemen, it really is second to none. I mean, you can say what you will about Mario's ability to evaluate other positions, but I truly think he evaluates offensive line as well as, if not better than, anyone in the country. Seeing what they've done with offensive lines in the past, I certainly think that the warm weather in South Florida didn't help, didn't hurt. I think it helped. It didn't hurt. But I also think one thing that maybe won't get talked about enough. Miami got in on his recruitment kind of early. Congdon's stock didn't really start blowing up until this January after his junior season. Miami offered him during his junior season. They were one of the first 10 schools to offer him. I think they came in as the 9th school. They started kind of prioritizing him early. They found him early on. They really started building those relationships. They moved very quickly to get him on campus after the start of the new year. And I really do think that it was kind of the perfect storm for Miami to be able to get a kid from the Midwest. And, now here we are once again talking about Miami's success recruiting the Midwest. Last year they also got another kid from Ohio and Luca Gilbert. They got a kid from Indiana and Brock Schott. Before that, they got 2 kids from Chicago in Marquise Lightfoot and Justin Scott. And I still think that, it's possible Miami adds a couple of more kids from the Midwest. They're going after, some really interesting tight ends. They're still after another offensive lineman from Ohio and Sam Greer. I don't know if Miami is totally done recruiting that region this year.
Yeah, so big offensive line pickup gives them a little bit of momentum, obviously, at that position. And like Steven said, Miami was very, very, very convinced that this guy was a guy that they wanted in the class, and for now they got him. But I will say this: beware of Ohio State. because if Ohio State were to come in and offer, listen, we're 9 months from signing day. So I still have a feeling that it, could be a battle there if that were to take place. But for now, he's a Miami Hurricane, and that's a good thing. All right, we have a ton of recruiting coverage on the site today. Not going to go through every single story. You can check it out. But, 5-star wide receiver Tristan Keys was on campus yesterday. You can check out the story on him. Calvin Russell, a guy that we still think is feeling really good about Syracuse for some crazy reason. But he did come out to Miami's practice yesterday. It was good to see him on campus. FSU commit Karan Maycock was out there as well. Miami's fighting to flip him from the Knowles. We give you the latest on that, among other stories. The Canes are taking off today. Doesn't mean we don't have coverage for you. We spoke to Inez Cooper after yesterday's practice. We got that story on the website today, so make sure you check that out. And we'll also have some other, recruiting stories and other things for you sprinkling in throughout the day today. So even though there's no practice, you'll have tons of coverage at CaneSport.com. So that's going to do it for Good Morning CaneSport for this morning. We thank you so much for starting out your day with us. And again, remember, if you're not a subscriber to CaneSport.com, please come on over to our website. We promise we will give you the best coverage of spring practice that you can get anywhere, and you can start getting acclimated to our community. You will not be sorry. So for Matt Shodell and Stephen Wagner, I'm Gary Ferman. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time, everybody.